If you run out of water on a long hike, you
Hmm.
know you're out of water, right? Do you start hiking back or do you just carry on? And if you don't know you're out of water and you really want to reach the top of the mountain, you get up there and you're now dehydrated and probably going to make a mistake and fall. Never ask the IRS for a favor. It's not a good idea. Like, don't give them the option to say no. So people see, they'll watch YouTube and like pennies on the dollar. And this guy, they settled out for blah, blah, blah. Like, you hear this term settlement. IRS doesn't
Yeah.
settle. They will take your money, that they're in the business of collecting.
We are redefining the future of this industry.
Welcome back to the show, everyone. This is where we explore the human side of success, right? The decisions, the challenges, the mindset shifts, the relationships that barely make it into someone's professional resume. This is Beyond the Bio. Today's episode is one that I think every business owner, entrepreneur, investor, and every high income family needs to hear. Most people don't think about tax law until something has already gone wrong, right? An audit, penalties, IRS letters, business restructuring problems, divorce complications, or massive unexpected liabilities. But today we're talking with someone who has spent nearly 2 decades helping families navigate exactly those situations. Our guest today, Steve Sizzik, partner and head of the estate, life, and legacy business and IP tax divisions of the Harris Law Firm here in Colorado. Steve has represented hundreds of businesses and individuals in high stakes tax matters, helped clients save millions in tax liabilities, and built a reputation on the region's top tax attorneys. But we're not done yet. He also is on the board of directors for the Second Chance Humane Society. Nonprofit work is super important to him as well. Steve, welcome to the show. Glad to have you here.
Yeah, thanks, Ben. Happy to be here.
Yeah, say, Steve, take us back a bit. You know, Tax law, the one thing that not everyone's going to just jump into and say, hey, I want to do this. How did you get into tax law in the first place? Like, how did you end up in this
Yeah.
space?
Yeah, I did not go to law school, thinking I wanted to delve into the nuts and bolts of taxes, and I certainly didn't graduate thinking that I would want to get into tax law. I actually, when I graduated from law school, I was inclined to be in litigation. At the time, I think Boston Legal was out. I was like, it was very, it was so great to be walking around on 16th Street, in a suit and acting like I was, the bee's knees. So I did. I got into complex, corporate litigation, and I ended up kind of finding myself in a basement of a Cody, Wyoming courthouse, reviewing 400 boxes of documents, looking for a drill stem test that was gonna just blow up this, wonderful oil and gas case for whatever reason. And I had to go for a run after that just to like clear myself of, refine my focus. And on that run in Cody, Wyoming, which is beautiful, by the way, I realized that this just was not for me. I was not inclined to spend my formative years as an attorney, being a document search, sort of associate. I did get to do a little bit of litigation, and I actually had a very good experience working on a case with Goldman Sachs.
Oh,
And
cool.
sort of like in that financial realm. And although I was not necessarily cut out for litigating with those kind of guys just because of their crazy work ethic and just nuts, but I really enjoyed that financial side. And so, in looking for a lifeboat, really, to get into something that was sort of less soul sucking, I fell into tax, and took a job with a financial firm, not even a law firm, just a financial firm that needed an attorney to help them out with some of their tax controversy work. That was 2 decades ago. And worked my way through a couple of different firms, ended up having and creating my own law firm, and I ran that for about 6 years, and then joined with Harris, where kind of brought my practice into theirs, and it's been symbiotic, and it's been one of the better professional decisions of my life, being a tax attorney, which is crazy. I really enjoy the work. And one of the things that I always tell people is like, IRS doesn't work on the weekends, man, and neither do I. So hey, like let's go. Like, I definitely am a work to live kind of guy, not live to work. But this is rewarding in both aspects. So that's
That's
my
awesome.
the journey of Steve Sizzik, right? As I fall into it.
That's awesome. Thank you for sharing. So,
Sure.
what was that moment where you're like, "Yeah, tax law. That's all me. I'm gonna do this." Like, what was that moment?
Um, it was probably about 8 years ago when I decided to go out and start my own firm. And it was like kind of a moment like either I'm going to do this all the way or I'm not. And I realized and this is, I think, prevalent nationwide. Tax attorneys are kind of a rare breed, especially younger tax attorneys.
Mhm.
And I'm kind of now older, but it was 10 years ago when I started that. And I decided, this is something that it's economy proof. And one of the cool things about being a tax attorney is, at least on the backside, early in my career, you couldn't really do anything to make the situation worse, right? You were
Mhm.
always sort of the knight in shining armor. Like literally, it was at the worst that it could be. Anything that I did was going to make it better for that business owner or that taxpayer. And so
Yeah.
it was, I have this saying like, no one calls me with good news, but rarely am I calling my clients with bad news. Because like, hey, I fixed this, or I got a hold, or we got a plan, or we're putting something in place to, bring that stress level down. And that was super rewarding. And I think there's a lot of practices, be it criminal or any sort of civil litigation, where a lot of times attorneys are on eggshells. Like, did I miss that case? Is the judge gonna call me out for this ruling of evidence? And you're just kind of not sure what's gonna happen at a given point. With tax, it's like, you know what? We're gonna dive into this. It didn't, this tax issue didn't, occur overnight, and we're not going to fix it overnight, but let's start the ball rolling. And there's so much appreciation I find from clientele, because of that. Just I had their back that
Mhm.
I was like, all right, I can run with this profession, and I think that I'm good at it. So let's take a crack at making a career out of it.
Heck yeah, that's awesome. Would you say it's kind of like almost like being a superhero in a sense, where it's like you're coming in to save the day in a way?
Yeah. Yeah, the villain is the feds, Uncle Sam. I wouldn't say I'm wearing a cape, but I do think that a lot of things, in a lot of ways, being able to take that burden, which is significant. I think that,
Yeah.
and purposely so, taxing authorities use fear to motivate. And
Hmm.
when you're operating in a state of fear, you're not operating intelligently, right? So if I
Sure.
can remove that component, whether it's a multi-million dollar business or if it's an individual, at the end of the day, those implications are the same. Like, hey, they're going to come and seize my payroll. They're going to come in, I'll try to fill up my gas tank, and I won't be able to do it on a Tuesday because the IRS took, whatever out of my bank account. I've got a multi-million dollar trust that they've come in and they've put a lien on, do those type of things. But, it doesn't matter if it's $100 million or $10,000. Like the implication of some government agency coming in and having this like authority over you, and you feel so helpless, I guess.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
can provide that help, right? And whether it is like literally just making a phone call and actually getting a hold of somebody over at the IRS, so they don't have to sit on hold for 4 hours and have somebody hang up on them, or being like, oh yeah, no, I looked at that audit documentation and your CPA put the number in the wrong spot, and I just saved you $100,000. That type of thing. In some, like I said, superhero, no, but if they think of me that way, I'll accept it.
Heck
Like
yeah.
I'm
Yeah,
happy
that's
to say,
awesome.
yeah, I'll do that for you. But yeah, I don't, at the end of the day, I just want to be good at my job, and I want people to appreciate the work, but I want that to speak for itself, for sure.
Sure. Absolutely. Yeah. And I want to go back a little bit too, back to, how you mentioned that you founded your own firm before joining, Harris Law Firm. What lessons did entrepreneurship teach you that make you a better attorney today? Or is there another moment in or point in time that you rely on sometimes to, hey, I became I am better today because of X experience?
Yeah, so in a couple ways, I think that first 3 years of my career, I learned a lot about, and I would never take it back, even though, like I said, it was definitely like sucked the life out of me
Yeah.
in doing that work. And I had some very tyrannical, partners and things like that. That it was just one of those things. But as a young attorney, I think it was good for me to understand, an attorney's role, and then also understand certain things like everything you write. Don't send an email without understanding that somebody could discover that. Various different things, and how to proofread your work before you send it out. Just like silly things. When I got just a young attorney, I just was not very conscious of the professionalism that is required when you are a service professional, right? So
Hmm.
I certainly took that from that experience, and then rolling that throughout my career. I think when I started my own firm, one of the things that I try to pride myself on is, continuing with that. No matter how busy that I am, my client's urgency is the priority. And it's a simple thing, but just sending an email, I got it, I'll get back with you. Like, I might be buried in, because you're running your own firm, you got books, you got payroll, you got, freaking taxes, like you got to do all
Yeah.
these
Yeah.
things in addition to your work. And actually, it's just a lot of burden to carry. But at the end of the day, my time constraints are not something that should prevent my client from getting a response from me. Even
Sure.
maybe it's not a full response, but it's a response like, "Hey, I'm aware of it. I'm on it. Not that urgent. Hey, that's a CP 504. This is a notice from the IRS. That's a glorified balance due notice. I know it comes in a green envelope and it says that they're coming for your firstborn child. Don't worry about it." Just saying that so that the client can come back down, as opposed to being like, "I'll get to that later because I'm so busy drafting this motion or whatever."
Sure.
It's
Yeah.
not. Try to empathize with that client. How are they feeling? Like, they don't know that I'm busy, but they know that they just got a green envelope saying that the IRS is coming for their kid. you know?
Yeah.
And so, Steve, I need you just to chime in here so that I can have a decent weekend. That carries a ton of value, like a ton of value. And I think that's lost art, just
Yeah.
communication. And it's so easy these days. Whatever, we're millennials, right? Like, so back in our day, there wasn't like, "I'll just text you and tell you it's okay." You can do that now, right? Clients, I
Yeah.
can use my phone server to text the client, and there's attorney client stuff I have to be concerned about. But if it's just like, "Got it, I'll take care of it," they really appreciate that. And that's something I've learned, throughout my career. Even now, as I've sort of gone up the ranks and I have more to control and manage, I still always default like, just call them back. Just tell them you got it.
You
Tell them
you
you're
know,
working on it, you kind of thing.
absolutely. And you actually hit on a really good point too that I want to dive into a little bit. And that is, the behavioral side of advising, right? Like, there's we both wait, we do our jobs and it's whether it's markets or taxes or whatnot, but there's always the behavioral aspect, which is I'm scared of whatever that is, right? The green envelope from the IRS, the markets tumbling, the tax due date. How do you how are you managing the behavioral aspect of advising when you're talking to the clients aside from the communication, walking them off that ledge? Talk more about that. I think that's super valuable for people to hear.
Yeah, no, and I think, if I had any advice with communication, specifically in a professional environment, and I teach all my attorneys this, and I teach all my paralegals this, and our staff, um, think about the response that's going to come from the email that you're sending.
Mhm.
Th- You know, you should know what probably the response is going to be, right? And if that response is going to create any stress for you or your client, you better be ready for that and try to be in front of it, right? So a lot of times, I'll draft an email, and I'll look at it and be like, all right, if I send this, it's going to cause this client to kind of spin out, and I'm going to lose my day talking them off a ledge.
Right.
Let me redraft this so that they won't spin out. Like,
Yeah.
it's, "Hey, we just lost the audit. You now owe $2 million to the IRS. Send."
Mm.
Right? No, horrible,
Yeah.
horrible email, right? Don't send that, right?
Yeah.
"Hey, we weren't successful at audit. I have some plans to deal with that. We have appeals that we can file. Can we set a call to go through it later so that we can go through strategy and make sure that you're taken care of?" Send. Same exact communication. The response back is going to be 1,000% different, right? So,
Super
that's
valuable.
something to really just, it's not that hard. because you're busy and you're just trying to communicate. But at the end of the day, if you don't do it in a manner that's going to be positively received, you're just now burying yourself in a bunch of work, talking them off the ledge the rest of the day. And guess what? It was worse than if you'd have just not sent it at all, right? So
Absolutely.
that's certainly some. I think that's just transcendent. I think you can use that in any sort of context when communicating with clientele.
Mhm.
And something like I said is super valuable, especially in a stressful environment.
That's awesome. Yeah, I think that's super important for clients, especially, to understand. Hey, there's two aspects to working with people, right? There's the behavioral and there's
Right.
the actual work. But yeah, let's go back a little bit to what you were talking about on the audit side. You had mentioned where sometimes it's just, hey, yeah, your CPA inputted some, the wrong information in your forms. That's that's an important distinction, right? Because people assume tax issues happen because someone's dishonest. Uh, but often there's more to it than that. Sometimes it could be a mistake from a CPA. Sometimes there's a little bit of complexity or lack of planning that's involved. I guess what are some of the biggest tax mistakes that you are seeing with entrepreneurs and business owners that they're making currently?
Yeah, I mean, I would say 90% of the cases I do have, it's not somebody being fraudulent or dishonest. And I'll be honest. I mean, if I identify a client who is, intentionally trying not to, pay their taxes or be, deceptive with respect to production, I will not represent them. In
Yeah,
most of the cases, it's not something that a business owner or an individual is doing intentionally. Negligent, perhaps, right? But not necessarily something where it's like, I'm a conscientious objector and I don't agree with the current administration, so I'm not going to pay my taxes. I'm not, buy gold bars and like hide in the woods or whatever. That's just really
right.
not, you're not seeking legal advice anyway if you're that type of person. And
It's also
so,
true.
yeah, right. I hope not. Well, you're not seeking it for me, that's for sure. So yeah, I mean, I see all the time. So, it was funny. I mentioned to you, I was doing a continuing legal education course with a bunch of real estate agents. And I was like, hey, some of my continuing clients are real estate agents, contractors, and dentists. Like, I don't know why dentists, like I'll never figure it out, but they're always trying to do something silly with their money. But the common theme is that they're getting, sort of variable income. Contractor is gonna, he's feast or famine, right? He's gonna build this building. He's gonna get a retention check, and he's got to keep his employees working until the project is done, and then the GCs get paid and the rest. But guess what? That project then gets extended. He's short on cash flow. Well, if he doesn't finish the project, then he doesn't get paid at all. So guess what? He's using the government with as an unauthorized lender, essentially, not
Mm,
paying his payroll taxes to make sure that the project gets done, and something falls apart. Maybe the project doesn't get finished or it gets extended further. Well, now you're looking at extensive liabilities. It wasn't intentional because you're like, look, I just got to get to the finish line. I have no choice. If I quit now, if I, really, fire my employees because I can't cover their payroll, then I'll never recover for the project that's already been done. Right. And so those are decisions, and those are difficult decisions that high level CEO CFOs have to make. But
yeah,
especially a business owner, CFO is going to say don't do it. We don't want to get in trouble with the IRS. The business owner is like, I don't have a choice. Like, I am in for a penny, in for a pound, and we're just going to have to deal with the fallout because hopefully we'll get paid on the back end and we'll cover the taxes. Guess what? If you don't get paid on the back end, now you're looking at $5-6 million for a business. You've got personal assessments from the 941s, those that withholding that can go against the officers of the business. And that's
sure.
when they're calling me. Right now, ideally, they're calling me before that, they make that decision, and it's like, all right, well, maybe we can mitigate the damage. I mean, I understand that there's some issues here, but I mean, taking out a loan to pay your payroll is way better
Yeah,
because the IRS has like an effective 22% interest rate plus penalties, right? So then it's like, wow, you're going to pay 40% for that 6 months you needed to not pay the IRS. Why wouldn't you just go get a business loan, even if it's predatorial? It's going to be better than owing the IRS. So these are discussions that I like to have on the front end. But I'll be real
yeah,
honest, when people are in that situation, they're not thinking about, oh, let me call a tax attorney and see how I can not pay my taxes. Right? They're going to say, I'm just going to not pay my taxes and I'll deal with it. This is what's in front of me right now. So
yeah.
that's something I see a lot. And then on an individual side, you just see either one, CPA is not being entirely forthright with their client, Two, the client doesn't want to hear what the CPA has to say. Or three, there's a situation where they're just, like paralysis by analysis. I
Sure.
didn't file in 2020 because of COVID. Now I'm behind. I can't get my stuff together. And now I just can't move forward. So I can't file 25 until I file 2020. Well, I can't find my stuff for 2020. I'm going to go to work and worry about it later. Well, guess what? Year after year, now we're in 26. You haven't filed for 6 years. You owe
Mm,
250,000 in taxes, and it's just so burdensome to think about that. And the one thing about the IRS is they don't really even catch up for about 3 years. And so they
yeah.
allow you to dig yourself deeper, and then, hey, I got that first notice. Um, I need to do something. I don't know what to do. I'm on the phone with this guy, I'm with IRS for 4 hours. Agent picks up and says, I got to pay in 30 days or they're going to, come and take all my stuff, which by the way is never the case. Then they call me, and I jump in and we can fix it. But, if there was any sort of advice, I would say, one, if you're a contractor for, getting sort of ebbs and flows of income, just be very, very conscious of like, it's not your money, until you pay taxes. So
Right.
I know you got $20,000 of commission for selling that house. You really only got 15. Look at it like 15. Don't look at it like 20 and decide what bills to take, to pay. Look at it like 15 and decide what bills you're going to pay, because the 5 for the government is not something that should be negotiable.
Sure. Yeah. No, you hit on two topics actually, that I want to make sure we cover. The first one is, especially with, with business owners, right? The ebbs and flows, the variable income. What would you say would be a way that they should start looking or start thinking more strategically before they end up in the mess that they sometimes end up in?
Yeah, yeah. So proper bookkeeping, proper planning, and then having a fallback plan.
Sure.
And a lot of times when you have startups, you don't have this option. And I'm acutely aware of it. So having a
Yeah.
slush fund for a rainy day, if you have and I actually have similar, I have a case like this. It's a, multi-unit residential building, in the mountains.
Mm,
And this particular client, to their credit, had created essentially a fund for if something fell through, right?
sure.
And it ultimately it did fall through, but they were so, yeah, I'll never understand why. But they wanted to preserve that rainy day fund. But I was like, it is a rainy day. Like this is the when we need to use it. Like this
Yeah.
is the reason why you have this. Like don't not pay your taxes because you want to preserve this $100,000 that's sitting in this account. It just doesn't make any sense. And so I was able to convince them and actually help them out with some penalties and things. But at the end of the day, that was a really, that made my job very much easier, because it's like when I have something to work with, I can call the IRS like, all right, they owe 90,000. Like we're gonna submit these in tranches so that it's not gonna, be a problem. Can we just like give them a break on the penalties and things like that? So then
Yeah.
it's like I have something to work with, as
Yeah.
opposed to, yeah, sorry. It was either they don't pay their employees and they don't finish it, or they don't pay their taxes. And then, client comes back to me and they're like, well, why won't they help me on the penalties? Well, you chose not to pay your taxes. Like, you're not gonna, promote that. Right. So,
Right.
having a plan, and then on the back end, I think in most cases, people that are successful enough to run businesses, especially when you get into like the net 5 mil, in that kind of area. And we work with like all over. I mean, I'll work down to, like $100,000 startups all the way up to 100 million plus, so it's just kind of
Sure.
like tax touches everything. But at the end of the day, if $100 million business is bookkeeping, floor screws something up, it's the same impact as if $100,000 startup, they don't have a bookkeeper at all. Right. And so being able to, in real time, see where you are financially, is so, so valuable, because you can see, if you run out of water on a long hike,
Hmm.
you're out of water, right? Do you start hiking back, or do you just carry on, right? And if you don't know you're out of water and you really want to reach the top of the mountain, you get up there and you're now dehydrated and probably going to make a mistake and fall, right?
Yeah.
And so, but
Yeah.
if you
That's actually
know, like
good.
halfway, yeah, no, I'm out.
Yeah. I like um, the way you worded that, which
Sure.
actually, so that leads me to the next question, actually, which is, and I think this gets confused a lot, right? What would be the difference between, especially when someone's trying to file their taxes, get their taxes figured out? What's the difference between a CPA versus a tax strategist versus a tax attorney? What should how should people distinguish those three different things?
Yeah. No, it's a great question, and even our marketing guys, like, you're like, hey, we need to do these podcasts or whatever. You're like, answer this question,
Yeah,
Steve, and I'll be like, that's a CPA question. I don't, I'm not going to give you like bean counting tax advice. I'm not a CPA.
yeah,
I'm a tax attorney, right? I mean, I'm what's called an
sure,
enrolled agent, so technically I can file returns. I just choose not to. So a CPA is someone who's going to look at your books, and CPA is different than a bookkeeper, right? A bookkeeper is what gets the QuickBooks together and looks through all the checks and does the inventory and all the rest. So that's the meat, right? CPA takes the meat and they create the sausage. Okay. And they're going to
mm,
go ahead and file that, whatever it is, file that return, or they're going to package it all up, put everything together and do it so that it's, properly filed. A tax attorney comes in a lot of different in cases where the CPA maybe didn't pack the sausage right. And the customer's like, "What is this, sawdust?" Like, "Oh, I don't know." So the tax attorney comes in and says, "Yeah, it actually is sawdust, but let me tell you what happened. It was a one-off. Let's go ahead and I'll give you the better sausage or whatever it is." Or the tax attorney could say, "Hey, look, I'm looking at the way you guys are making this sausage, and it's inefficient and it's a waste of money. Like, why don't you
got it.
package this sausage in a different way?" And let me give you some advice on how to do that. Yeah, and so there's really, uh, we don't want to confuse a CPA, and a lot of times tax attorneys are CPAs, and there's no referendum on that for me at all. These people are amazing, right? They
Yeah,
they know, they can see behind the curtain in a lot of ways where I wouldn't be able to. But I
yeah,
think not being a CPA does, and being a former sort of corporate litigator, and I'm a business management major, by trade.
yeah,
I
yeah.
got my undergrad, so I'm looking at it from a strategic perspective, right?
Mm,
Where a lot of times CPAs, they are black and white. This is where the beans go, right? Where I'm like, well, yeah, they should go there, but let's just say, what if we did this? And the system will allow us to maybe put this in a different box. Why don't we try that? And a CPA may not be seeing it that way just because they're like very formulaic in the way
yeah,
that they operate. And so, like I said, once again, if you're a CPA and a tax attorney, you're going to, I know plenty of them, and that's no referendum on them. But I will say that I have a different type of view than they do. And sometimes that gives me a competitive advantage for sure.
sure, yeah. Would you say, because I'm sure you've had these same conversations with clients where it's like, hey, uh, I don't need a bookkeeper. I have a CPA, or my bookkeeper handles all my stuff. Would you say that for any entrepreneur, any business owner, that they should have a separate bookkeeper, separate CPA, separate tax attorney, or would you say the CPA and bookkeeper can be one? Like, how would you say that should be if it's an efficient structure, to work in the client's best interest? What would
Yeah.
you say would kind of be ideal?
I mean, it's a great question. I think it depends on the complexity of your entity. Can a CPA do the books? Sure. But can a CPA do the books for a multi-million dollar entity and also do the returns? I think they're going to be they're going to be overextended, right?
Sure.
I do have, CPA groups that I'll refer out where they'll have an independent bookkeeper that works in house that will then
Yeah.
talk to the CPA that works in house, and then they'll refer to me any tax issue, outside that, because usually CPAs won't have in-house attorney. And so, those are three different branches. I guess the one thing would be they all should be working together in concert.
Right.
um, I I prefer if my client is working with a CPA who I have a relationship with. And that doesn't mean it has to be before. Like, I'm not out there saying, well, if you hire me, you got to go work with my CPA and it's a, freaking Ponzi scheme. What I would like is to have the CPA call me, and say,
Yeah.
hey, Steve, like, I understand you're working on this, like, this is how I saw it when I filed this. I appreciate you coming in and, like, looking at it with me, and let's collaborate to make sure that whatever we produce to the IRS, is going to be, in everybody's best interest. And oh, by the way, I won't miss something because I didn't know why they did it. And then they won't say, they won't begrudge it and be like, this attorney is, second guessing what I did. The last
Right.
thing I need to do is be fighting with your own group, right? Now there are situations where I'll talk to the CPA and then I'll be like, we need to get a different we need to get a different CPA. Like this person is making mistakes and we need to like stop that. And here's some referrals, go ahead and do it. But my first inclination is to work with the crew that you have,
Sure.
the devil that you know, right? So there's definitely, the roundabout way of answering your question is yes. Can one person do bookkeeping and CPA work? Yes. Probably that same person can't do the legal work. But depending on your situation, you may not want that, because you need to
Yeah.
have sort of church and state. You need to have a little bit of barriers, and you need to have somebody who has the bandwidth to do it correctly for you.
Sure. Yeah. No, that makes perfect sense. But then also the willingness to create the team aspect around the client, right? Like, I,
100%.
I, I have this mentality of, all these different areas, right? They kind of intersect in different ways, but it's that we, as professionals, we all know the area that we should be in. Let's loop in the other professional, have that conversation, right? And so that way we're all on the same page and can do right by the client versus I got this.
Right.
um,
Right.
but so kind of transitioning a little bit, going from the CPA's tax law, let's talk a little bit about how tax law can intersect with divorce, estate planning, wealth preservation. How often are you finding that people are underestimating the tax consequences of divorce when we're looking at the broader picture?
Yeah. I mean, it is almost every time, and it's crazy. Harris Law Firm, they're the biggest family law firm in Colorado, and they didn't have a tax practice before I joined. They would farm work out to me, and I would do it for them. But
Yeah.
since I have joined the firm, I'm close with the 30 plus family law attorneys here, and I work with them daily. And you would be, and I have been surprised at the lack of financial acumen a lot of times with opposing counsel.
Mm,
And I got taught a whole continuing education course on the divorce tax, and it's been super popular because they just don't know. And that's not a referendum on a family law attorney. They're just not trained that way. They're not trained to look at it, marital assets equalize worry about custody and other more like emotional and significant things in people's lives, right? But now
right.
you're looking at high net worth individuals, you're looking at business separations, you're looking at assets, you got a house in Breckenridge that we have to deal with, and it's like, hey, the wife got the house in Breckenridge, the husband got the retirement accounts. If she sells the house in Breckenridge, she's going to carry equity of like 2 million. There's a
Hmm.
tax component there, man. And we need to build that into this equalization because he's going to hold the retirement accounts and he's not going to carry that tax implication at all. So she's really getting kind of like the short shrift because she's going to owe 500,000 in taxes, and he's going to owe, over time, if he holds those retirement accounts long enough, we can strategize where he doesn't pay hardly any taxes. And so that's sort of a situation when I get pulled into these cases. My attorneys here at Harris are like, brilliant, and then I'll fire
Yeah.
an email off to opposing counsel, and they're like, never thought about that, Steve. I'm like, yeah, I guess we do need to look into that. And one of the cool things about my job, in particular with the family law side, is I am not opposing counsel. I am doing this to help everybody. So my opposing counsel is the government, and I don't want them to get one hot penny more than they're supposed to get, right? So then I'm working with both parties, and it's fun because it's contentious between my family law attorney and their family law attorney, but I'm
Yeah.
talking to both of them, and we're like high fiving trying to save on taxes. So that's
Right.
really fun on the family law side. On the trust and estate side, I think that people are more sophisticated when they come in to get a foundation or irrevocable trust. There's a lot of different, like, there's qberts and q-tips and all these sort of slats and clats and all these things. Usually those are designed for tax savings, but I also pop in and I have these very I guess, honest conversations with clients where it's like, what is the goal of your estate plan? Are you trying to protect assets? Are you trying to save on taxes? Because a lot of times those are divergent concepts. It's like, I've got a client who had been run through. He's in my book. He had run through the ringer, with IRS, and we ended up saving him, whatever, $600,000. And he's like, I will never do this again. Like,
Yeah.
Steve, create a structure so if feds come at me, I'll have a penny to my name, and I can like give them the two middle fingers and like tell them like, come and get me, guys, kind of thing. And I was like, all right, I can do that. I can set up these intentionally defective, irrevocable trusts, and we can put all your assets into Wyoming, holding companies and all this. But you're going to pay an effective 45% tax rate for the ability to be protected. And he was like,
Right.
no problem. Like, I'm happy. I don't want to do this again. Okay. But usually I'm like, like, why would you pay the government more? Protect yourself from the government. Like, it just doesn't make any sense. So a lot of times there's like hybrids of that and things we can do. But having a tax attorney come in and be like, hey man, like, I understand, what the state attorney is saying about trying to pull money out of your estate for when you die. That's they're living in that box.
Hmm.
I understand where the business law attorney is saying, hey, you need to put all your properties in different LLCs so that protected from civil protections and things. That's that
Yeah.
box. But the tax box touches both of those. And it's like, all right, practically speaking, what is the damage for these things that we're setting up for you? And are you willing to incur that, incur that pain? Because sometimes it's
Right.
not,
Yeah.
like, you don't need 32 LLCs because you have 32, individual residences. We could probably set up 4 and get some insurance, like that's maybe that's
Yeah.
easier because all those forms and all the taxes you're going to have to pay is going to exceed whatever potential exposure you might have. So that's something we look into a lot with those two different, aspects, and on the business counsel as well.
Sure. Yeah. No, that's super valuable. So splitting up the two sides, right? Family law, the business with, the estate planning that you just talked about. When when a client comes to you, what ideally do you like to see as far as a team structure? Do you like to see if they have accountants, CPAs, advisors already in play with them, or do you prefer to say, hey, look, here you don't have these people yet, but I want you to have these people. Like, what's your ideal team structure when it comes to both estate planning, the divorces, or is it really just no? Hey, the on the we're the players here, and we'll just handle it ourselves. I guess what's kind of that
Yeah.
mentality? What do you typically
I
recommend?
think, yeah, I mean, I think that Harris does a great job of like, if you need a legal team, we got you, right? So we got state, we got trust, we got tax, we have civil, criminal, business, I name it. I think we just, we got IP, I have a sports law
Yeah,
division that just opened, it just is. So you come in and it's like, yeah, Harris is my lawyer. Yeah, let me call my lawyer. Someone at Harris is going to be able to take care of you. And that's great. I think that that's been something that has been developed since I've joined, and something that I'm spearheading. That's why there's so many like divisions after my name,
yeah,
sort of heavy as the crown kind of thing. I don't know what I took on here, but I'm very proud of it. And I think it's a really good system, and it really provides our
sure,
clients with a lot of help. But when it comes to a financial team, you make a really good point. And one thing that we find a lot in the divorce cases is that you'll have one moneyed party and you'll have one less moneyed party. And when
hmm,
they divorce, they split. So now we have two moneyed parties, but one has all the people, right? Because they were the
right,
ones handling the money. The other one, dealing with the kids, dealing with whatever, they've got all this money. They don't have any people, right? And so in that particular instance, we're saying you need a financial advisor, you need a CPA, you may need, trust counsel. Let's get you with somebody who can handle insurance, things like that. So I have a Rolodex. I'm sorry, I'm old. I have a list on my computer
I have
of
not heard that term in a long time.
it's a term of art. It's like when your phone rings and it's a bell. Why is it a bell? It's a computer.
Right.
So I've got a list of all of those, and I'm always adding to that list. I have financial advisors in Denver and nationwide that I work with. I have CPAs, Denver and nationwide that I work with. Certainly there's other accounting firms and all the way up to like VCs and things like that, where I make a point to just meet everybody,
Sure.
because once again, tax touches everything. So then I can be a resource for them. But I really like to provide to my clients like that, that widow or that divorcee or individual who's now And it's not always like the male female. I've actually found that a lot of times, the male is the one that was, not the money party, and the female is the, sort of the captain of industry, and they're, we're
Yeah.
different situations, right? But it, you just need to set them up. Like, all right, here's the plan.
Yeah.
What's the plan, Steve? Like, well, you got to take care of your financials. Your divorce is done. Well, we don't just send them off into the world, which like I said, I'm super proud of. Someone is sitting there, like, just went through one of the most, traumatic experiences of their life. And then they just got, they walk out of my office and they're on their own. No, like, say, come back in. Let's talk with my team, and let's get you with the right people. Like, let's get you with Ben. Let's
Sure.
get you with, Kurtz Fargo and Boulder. Let's get you, whatever it is.
Sure. Sure.
And depending on the value of the estate that they're, the marital estate that they've acquired, then the complexities of, creating trust for their kids and protecting. I mean, we got into some serious, anecdotally, there was a split couple, and the one spouse was concerned that if something were to happen to her, then, like, by default under Colorado law, all of the money that she had that she wanted for her kids would go to him.
Right.
And she wasn't confident that he would take care of them properly. And this was a lot of money, and so it was very important for her and for us to put all of her assets in a box so it could be protected. So if there was something to happen to her, the former spouse would not have access to that, the corpus of that, and they would be there to take care of those kids.
Sure.
So that's
Yeah.
just kind of a, certainly, kind of almost like a more common thing. And then things can, like, go up in levels of complexity when it comes to business divorces and things like that.
Sure. So I want to transition a little bit back to the IRS and how you're helping the clients handle the IRS. You actually wrote a book, and it was called, Unlocking the Code. It was focused on the IRS negotiations, but what are some of the biggest misconceptions that you're seeing people have about negotiating with the IRS? Is it like, are you finding that people are like, what, we can do that? Or no, are they arguing with you saying, you can't do that? That's the government, they have the iron fist.
Right,
Like,
right.
how are you handling those?
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, yeah, I did write a book, and if you have trouble sleeping, or if you need something for your commode, to decorate, you could always just get one of those. It's a riveting read. My brother actually read it. It was like the best compliment I had. He's like, he read it, and I was like, thanks for reading my book, man. And he's like, yeah, it was a good book, good content, but I read it in your voice, Steve, and it was the funniest thing I've ever read. And I'm like,
That's awesome.
thanks, I guess. But I did write it. As you can probably tell from my personality, I like to have anecdotes and I like to have stories. And I've had 20 years of doing this. And so it's like, how do I write something that's going to be, valuable, but then also is not going to be like a eye rolling, like, tax text, which nobody wants to read, right? So I designed it with, like, hey, this happened this one time, and this is what we did, and this is how we got. And so people I've had good reviews with respect to how I've communicated those sort of more complex topics in a way that can be understood. So that was that brought joy to my my life, when I was like,
That's
I did something
awesome.
right here. But as far as your question, I think that a couple of things that I've learned, in general, and it's transcendent, whether that was 15 years ago, or today when I was on the phone with them this morning. Never ask the IRS for a favor. It's not a good idea. They're going to say no. Like, don't give them the option to say no, right? So people see, they'll watch YouTube and, like, pennies on the dollar. This guy, they settled out for blah blah blah. Like, you hear this term settlement. IRS doesn't
Yeah.
settle. Like, they will take your money. That they're in the business of collecting. They're not in the business of removing debt, right? And
Right.
so, like, a very good example. Like, hey, never ask for an extension from the IRS. Tell them you're going to send it. You know, like, if you ask for an extension, they're going to deny the extension. If you write them a letter saying, here is some of the documentation, I will get the rest of it together and I will send it under separate cover shortly. Guess what? You've given yourself an extension. And the guy who's receiving that letter is like, received. And it goes back into the system, and then you supplement it, and you get a call later on, like, I see that the packet's not, but oh yeah, you know what, they probably didn't get all the packet, let me give it to you now, kind of thing, right?
Sure.
So offer and compromise, like, this is this sort of, I mean, this is the hot button, like, this is, I'm going to offer this amount and under less, or whatever it is. And I have clients always say, well, hey, I got an inheritance. How about I just offer them the inheritance and they go away, and my always I always respond, no. Like if you have the ability to pay the IRS, they will wait for you to pay them, right? And so
Right.
they're bankruptcy proof for the most part. I mean, there's some levels of bankruptcy that go in this, but they're not like a credit card company where they
Right.
say, hey, well, I'll take 15 on a dollar because if I don't, they're going to file bankruptcy and I'm getting nothing. Well, IRS they're not concerned about that, right? And so it's like, yeah, well, why wouldn't they do that? Does it make financial sense? Well, it doesn't make financial sense. The IRS is not there to make financial sense. They want to collect, right? And so they've got a lien on your house. So they'll just sit tight. They'll just sit tight. And if you decide to sell your house, they get full paid. Why would they settle with you if they can get full paid and through another means, right? So we never ask them for a favor. We work within the system that they are subject to, and we get to the same result. And one of the best examples of this is the IRS cannot collect on a debt after 10 years of the assessment. So,
Really?
and that's a little bit, it's a little bit wonky, but like, let's say, for example, you file a tax return in 2025. You owed $5 million. There's no way you're going to be able to come up with that. This is not something that in the history of the world is going to happen. So you call the IRS and you don't ask them for a favor, but you say, hey, I don't have the ability to pay $5 million. How about I pay $1,000 a month, and we'll just kind of see what happens. So you set up
Yeah.
$1,000 per month installment agreement. You aggregate that out. You end up paying less than $100,000 over 10 years. After 10 years, the interest and penalties on that 5 million is probably at 12 million.
Oh, wow.
You've paid 100,000 at $1,000 a month because you never won the lottery or anything, and it drops off. And so you didn't ask them for a $12 million deduction of your taxes. You just
Yeah.
allowed the system to play itself out. And you were in communication with them and you let them know what your financials look like. You carried on with your life and you just had a very expensive house you never got to see. But at the end of the day, you saved yourself millions and millions of dollars. Same result, just a different strategy and a more pragmatic one, right? So that's kind of how I operate when I negotiate with them. And yeah, it's one of the fallacies that people, and it drives me crazy, but it's like, I saw on YouTube that I could file this and I could get a loan. And it's like, what, if you saw it on YouTube first, like, that ain't a good idea. And then second of
Right.
all,
Yeah.
if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. But one of the things that and it's in the book is, one of the things that I sort of have built my practice on. I think it might have been Edward Jones or someone, back in the history, is like, I don't need a lawyer to tell me what I can't do. I need a lawyer to tell me what I want to do properly, right?
Right.
And so it's not my job to say no. It's my job to say, okay, let's figure it out,
Yeah.
and people
Super,
appreciate that.
super valuable. Yeah. No, that's that's a lot
Yeah,
of information that most people don't know. And you've hit on a
yeah,
huge hot button. YouTube, TikTok. Stay off those things.
yes.
But
Watch these. These are much better. There's
yeah.
your reputable content.
Right. So, all right, we're going to jump into our lightning round. This is the fun round where I'm going to just throw a bunch of questions at you. Just answer the first that comes to mind, and we'll go one by one. And before we wrap up, but you ready?
Yeah, let's do it.
Cool. Okay. So, question one: best financial advice that you've ever received.
And this was actually from my tyrannical former partner at that civil litigation firm. He said, "Buy a house that you're going to stay in. Don't get a starter home. Get the house you're going to stay in." And that's best. I bought a house that year, and I've been in it ever since. And it's got skyrocketed in equity, and I have a family of 5, and I've never had to move. And thank God for that
Heck yeah.
advice.
All right. Most common bad advice entrepreneurs follow.
Um, Fake it till you make it. I think that's a terrible, terrible process because as you're faking it, you are acquiring a lot of problems. Be that legal, financial, taxation. Just grow correctly. Grow correctly. And if you do that, you're going to be, in a much better position to succeed. The 1 in 100 fakes it and makes it. 1 in
Yeah.
10 does it correctly and makes it.
What's one tax move every business owner should at least explore one time?
Um, Yeah, I mean, I think, looking at entity structures, and having a discussion with a tax attorney before you dive in, And I think that a lot of times people will overstructure on the front end, and it's not needed, or they will ignore a structure once they start going and they don't have a plan. And so, okay, we'll start as an LLC. When we hit a certain benchmark, we will then move to S-Corp. If S-Corp, carries through and we want to do some more complex stuff, now we're a multi-million-dollar business and we want to have, you know, um, qualified small business tax exemptions and things like that. Okay,
Sure.
what's the plan then? Do we start a new corporation? How do we carry forward things like that? So having the plan for your entity structure, maybe not necessarily executing it right away, hitting benchmarks before you execute it, but like, okay, now we are at a 5 mil gross. This is a good time to go to S corp. We have a plan for that. A lot of times they even build it into bylaws. That's a really good idea, and certain something that I wish a lot of people would do more.
Sure. All right. Three more questions for you. What's more dangerous, bad bookkeeping or bad entity structure?
Bad bookkeeping,
Okay.
100%. Because that's the thing that can really cause the audit risk. It can cause the lack of financial knowledge, and it can actually cause loss of significant funds if you're not accounting for things correctly. So, and these structures are, can be a headache. You could lose percentages of tax savings, but they will not destroy your business. Yeah, in most
Mm,
cases.
solid. What's one thing that that wealthy families are doing differently?
I think that wealthy families are just a little more introspective about the 1, 5, 10 year plan, and so they're not looking at like how do I send my kids to college. They're looking at how would I preserve my kids' wealth, into
Mm,
perpetuity. But that same sort of like forward thinking strategic planning that should apply to whether you're wealthy or not, because the same strategy for $10,000 can be viable for 10 million, and it's just a
sure,
function of maybe we don't spend the amount of time and money on the legal because we just we don't have it, but having the plan in place can save exponentially on taxes and on brain damage, really.
sure. Okay. So, and last question for you. This is going to be maybe a harder one for you to answer, but if you could go back in time and let's just say talking to 20-year-old Steve, what's the one thing that you would want to tell yourself about either what you're to experience or um, how to plan for what you're going to be doing? Like, what would you go back in time and say to yourself to be prepared for the future, knowing what you know now today?
I think athletically, I would tell myself to not compete in that Red Bull competition in 2020 when I blew out my knee, ruined my ski career.
Yeah.
That's what I default to, Ben.
Don't do that.
Just don't do it. You're fine. You're gonna go to the Olympics, man. Professionally, you're right. It is a hard one. I am very happy in my own skin. I'm happy where I am. I have had kind of a roller coaster of a career, but it's all been, it's all shaped me for who I am now. And so I think, if there was something I would tell myself, and I wouldn't give it away, but I'd say, hey, there's going to be some rough spots,
Mm,
but you're going to make, buckling down and getting through them is going to make you better. Because they're, and I think in any profession, and I'm sure, if the markets drop out for you, these are tough days, man, or you
yeah,
lose a big client or whatever it is, and it's one of those things where you can't ride that wave. You need to take it as it comes. And I think, when I was younger, I think I probably internalized and I carried a lot more burden than I should have, with
yeah,
respect to a lot of that stuff that was outside of my control. And so, just saying, hey man, it's gonna be okay. Like just do you.
yeah,
You keep doing what you're good at, lean into your strengths and try to limit your weaknesses, and things are gonna be okay. So that if I could sort of like put an arm around my young self when I was stressed out because once again, read the book. There's stories in there about some stuff where like legitimate psychological trauma for some of this stuff. Probably being able to internalize that and realize that that's a probably a good thing, that
Yeah.
you're able to go through that and learn from it, and then just be a better person and professional because of it, for sure.
Sure. Yeah. No, Steve, this was incredibly valuable. Thank you so much for being on the show. I think one of the biggest takeaways from today is that tax strategy, isn't just about compliance. It's about protecting your future, your business, your family, your peace of mind. If people want to connect with you and learn more about your work and just learn more about, hey, working with Steve, where should they go?
So Harris Law Firm, you can go to the website here. It's harrislawharris.com. My direct number, happy to give it out here at the firm. It's 303-515-5015. That's 303-515-5015. Or you can email me. Email is on the website. That's actually comes directly to me if you look me up on my bio. If you want to take a look at the book, you can catch that on Amazon. So just look up Unlocking the Code and then Steve Sizzik, and then that'll pop up. It's a short read. It's like maybe like over 100 pages with big type. So and I think it's, if you have the Kindle thing, you can get it for free. So God bless you, just get it for free. And it's also free. The electronic version is free on the website as well. So if you don't mind reading a PDF version of it, it's there as well. And then I'm in Denver. Right now I'm actually at our Larimer office, right across where the flags are there, from Ocean Prime. Beautiful location. I'm always happy to have anybody come in and sit down and talk. We can go grab a cup of coffee. I really enjoy, you probably can tell, like, I like to hear myself talk. So I am happy to sit down with anyone in the financial industry or in a CPA industry, or just someone who's running a business, and just like, hey, Steve, like, can I just grab 30 minutes of your time? I will have a consult with you. Like, we'll make sure you clear conflicts, and then we can just, kind of cut it up. So at any point, give me a call, give me an email. And then yeah, we can go through it. And even if it is just to say hey and make the connection, this business is all about connections, and it's all
Right.
about me being available for people who need me, because sometimes they don't know it. And I had an attorney, like, I was having lunch with an attorney down in Denver, and he was like, it was so interesting to find that someone like you exists, Steve. And I was like, man, like, I need to do better at marketing, because I do exist, and I don't want to pat my own back, but I'm really good at what I do, and I want to be able to provide that service for people, and be available, so the more people that know we're out here, and how we can assist them, the better, for sure.
Awesome. No, thank you for sharing. And it's good to have you on the show today. Thank you so much for taking the time to share about yourself, about your practice. I really appreciate you having being on the show.
Yeah, Ben, no problem at all. It's been a pleasure.
If you're enjoying this content, feel free to subscribe, share, hit the bell, and we'll see you in the next one.